Dr. Amy Jadesimi is the Managing Director of LADOL Free Zone. She's quite passionate about issues concerning women. And as the United Nations Women celebrate 10 years in this year 2020, she'll be speaking with us on a number of issues as it concerns women, particularly Nigerian women. Welcome to this edition of the program Agenda 2030 for Sustainable Development. My name is Hope Orivri, and it's my pleasure to welcome Dr. Amy Jadesimi on the program today.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Now, this year 2020 marks 10 years of the United Nations Women, and quite a lot has been discussed. Raised on the forefront is the fact that when they talk about sustainable development, what does it mean? And the United Nations Women has also raised an important highlight to say it's not enough to generalize, but we want to know what each country is doing, what sustainable development actions are being taken to ensure the women are carried along.
Absolutely.
And like I mentioned earlier, you're quite passionate about issues that concerns women and young girls, looking at areas where they can have empowerment. Share with us what you have seen as sustainable development when it comes to women and young girls.
Thank you. So firstly, the United Nations has 17 development goals known as the SDGs. Empowerment and equality for women is goal 5. It's important for us all to understand that without achieving goal 5, we can't achieve any of the other goals. So in other words, we're not doing women a favor by having a goal dedicated to them. By having a goal dedicated to women, we're ensuring that all the other goals are met. And why am I saying that? So there is a wealth of data now available that shows that having equality on boards, having equality in government, having equality in the home, so sharing of responsibility in the home, leads to higher returns in every situation. So in the private sector, you get higher profitability and quite significant increase in returns of up to 30–40% in some reports. If you're looking at it in government, you get better decision making. We all know now that during the COVID-19 crisis, I think Nigeria has done quite well, but across the world, the countries that have done the best are those that are run by women. And that's not a coincidence. And that is a scientifically relevant statistic. The other thing to look at is the home. And that is not just, again, about helping women. If you have an educated wife, if you have an educated homemaker, that means that the whole family will be better educated and the income generated by that family will be higher if you have an educated, empowered, supported wife, whether she stays in the home or she goes out to work. So in every dimension, we need to support women and we need to support equality. Now, what we've seen happening across the world is a very sporadic implementation. What we've seen happening in Nigeria is women increasingly making their voices heard. 20 years ago, we really didn't have any women in government, and if they were in government, most of them were not notable. And we have many notable women in government now. Our Minister of Finance is a woman. Our Minister of State in the transportation sector is a woman. So we have that representation. In my industry, we have the Minister of State for Trade and Investment is also a woman. So having these icons, having women in positions of power is very important. We also have to look now at structural changes. So from the business perspective, a company like LADOL, we took the view very early on that you cannot afford not to support women. Why? Because as a company building a new economy, building a sustainable business model, we need every advantage we can get. And empowering women and embedding processes that help women to stay in work or help them return to work if they leave to have children actually makes the company more successful. And for a company like LADOL that started off building infrastructure, then building facilities, now delivering services, we operate 24/7, we're surrounded by sharks and, we're relatively small fish in a big pond where a lot of people are attacking us. And people often wonder, what's the secret? There's no secret. We run our company sustainably. And a big part of that is about who is in your management team, who are you employing? And empowering women throughout the organization is definitely one of the keys to success.
Okay. Thank you. Now, I want us to narrow down to the situation in Nigeria. And when we talk about sustainable development, I want you to also look beyond maybe women in the formal sector. I want you to look at women in the informal sector and then young girls. I look at partnerships and investments. If you do a review, how well would you say that is partnerships and investments that would ensure development of young girls and women? And if we have data, what does it tell of what Nigeria is doing already?
Okay. So in terms of the informal sector and in terms of entrepreneurship, you always have far more women entrepreneurs. But our informal sector across the world, Nigeria included, is not well codified. So we don't have very detailed data on that. But the data we have shows us that 80% of the jobs are actually created by small to medium-sized enterprises. Women, more often than not, end up in small to medium-sized enterprises. But it is enormously harder, something like 7 to 11 times harder, depending on the report you read, for women to raise money than it is for men. On the other side, women-led companies, whether that's a woman leader or a woman as part of a leadership team, have a far greater chance of success and have a statistically significant greater chance of being around 5 years after they start. So in other words, the data tells us that if you're going to give money to a startup, you're going to give money to an SME, you're better off giving it to women. They repay their loans, their companies are more sustainable, etc. But it's harder for women to raise money. So that means we need structural change. Again, this is why we advocate for positive discrimination for women, not because we think women are better than men, but because the imbalance right now is so great that without that positive discrimination, targeting loans to women, for example, you're not going to level the playing field. And unless we level the playing field, we all suffer, both men and women.
Okay, fine. Then I want you to specifically, since you've looked at those indices, if you advise on partnerships and investments to at least address whatever inequalities are there right now, and particularly because of the COVID-19 crisis, we know quite a number of enterprises run by women have suffered so much, and we're looking to recovery. What would you advise such partnerships and investments should be? And I also want to look at the fact that they should be ones that we can put a tab on and be able to get good data and be able to do very clear monitoring so that we can use such data to do future plans.
Thank you. Yeah. So right at the beginning of this crisis, way back in March, we saw the CBN under Governor Godwin Emefiele took swift action. And they gave interventions to the private sector to alleviate the burden of loans. I think that was great. Now we're in the last quarter of the year. I would advocate two things. One, extending those measures to keep the economy as buoyant as possible. Most private sector companies have basically had to write off this year. So I think it's important not to allow people to go under because of this artificial, extraordinary, force majeure situation. So that's a general thing, which I think the CBN has already done a good job of starting. They need to continue. Now, when it comes to creating more jobs and keeping people who are employed, again, I would advocate positive discrimination. Through the CBN, you can have the CBN itself and our private sector banks set up funds specifically for women. We already have certain amounts dedicated to supporting SMEs, I would strongly advocate that you have an equal amount, and that can be, or even more, 10 to 20%, set aside specifically to lend to women-led companies. And that doesn't just mean a company that's led by a woman, it just means a company that is either led by a woman or has women in the management team. And again, there is data that shows if you do that, you will get a higher return. So this is a win-win proposition.
As a close to our discussion, we are moving into the decade for action come 2021. Let's look at what we have been doing. When I say we, I mean Nigeria, be they in private sector or in the public sector, what Nigeria has been doing to sustainably support young girls. What areas can we look at?
So again, we need to look across the spectrum. So first of all, I would say over the past few years, we've seen an increase in positive rhetoric about supporting women. So I think the will is there, and that's very important. The will wasn't always there. You know, if you look at just 100 years ago, women were out just campaigning for the right to vote. My grandmother, when her husband was assassinated, had to fight just to be allowed to keep the inheritance, most of which she lost anyway. But when she was younger, she had to fight to be educated. That's just my grandmother. So it was in the recent past, women were seriously disenfranchised across the world and in Nigeria. We're in a much better position now. So firstly, the young women growing up now have the opportunity to do things that other women had to fight for. However, they still face societal discrimination. They still face the judgment around their person based on stereotypes that are defunct. So what I would say to the young women is take your strength from obviously yourself, your religion, but also from the understanding that without you, Nigeria cannot develop. Again, without meeting Goal 5, without empowering women and having female equality in positions of power and at every rung along the ladder, we won't achieve the rest of the SDGs. So it's important for young women to understand that they are critically important. Their contribution is important. And even if you might be in a situation where people don't appreciate that, don't let that stop you from doing what you need to do for yourself or your country. The other thing we need is structural change. Again, we need to change the playing field. The playing field is tipped against women. That means you need to positively discriminate. In the workplace, you need programs to recruit women. You need to incentivize your department heads through bonuses when they recruit women for having a balanced, diverse team. You need to incentivize that. You need to put programs in place that give paternity leave so your male staff can go on leave, not just putting the burden on the women. And again, there's data that shows there are men that want to go on paternity leave, but they can't because they're stigmatized or because their employees won't let them. So we need structural change in the workplace. We need structural change in the government. You have a country like Rwanda that sets itself targets and says we cannot constitute this body unless we have a certain number of women. When the mission of Nigeria was reconstituted, we introduced federal character. Well, I am advocating federal character for women. In the same way that we want a representation from across the country, we need equal representation of women in government. Again, a structural change needs to happen. And in the home, we also need men and women to understand that they play an equal role. Even if only one of you is going out earning, and that one could be the woman, whichever one of you is going out earning, the data shows that your family will be wealthier if both of you are educated, both of you are empowered, both of you contribute.
So thank you so much, Dr. Amy, for talking about inclusiveness for women as we work towards the decade for action come 2021 for sustainable development.
Thank you.
Thank you. So viewers, thank you so much for being with us on Agenda 2030 for Sustainable Development. Today we spoke with Dr. Amy Jadesimi. She is the Managing Director of LADOL Free Zone, and we've heard her insights concerning the support that women need even as we look at the sustainable development. Thank you.